"No, don't do it." But the rancher did it anyway. The whole town was scandalized fire. Life moved slowly there, like the gentle flow of the creek that ran behind the old wooden bridge. The streets were lined with modest houses, each with tidy gardens, and on weekends, children played freely in the open fields. People greeted each other with smiles and nods, and strangers were a rare sight. The town had its rhythm, simple but comforting, and most of the residents liked it that way. They enjoyed their routines, the safety of familiarity, and the unspoken understanding that life in Willow Creek was calm and predictable. Among the townspeople lived a man who was unlike anyone else in Willow Creek. He was known simply as the rancher. His real name was seldom mentioned in conversation, and even those who had lived in the town for years admitted that they did not know him very well. The rancher owned a large piece of land on the outskirts of town, where tall grass swayed in the wind and a herd of cattle roamed freely. His ranch was beautiful, but it also gave him an air of mystery. From a distance, his house looked ordinary, but anyone who ventured closer noticed the unusual decorations around the property. Handcrafted wooden sculptures, strange patterns carved into fences, and a small windmill that seemed oddly out of place. The rancher was a tall man with a sturdy build, the kind of person who looked like he could handle any challenge that came his way. His face was weathered from years of working under the sun, and his eyes held a sharp, intelligent gleam. Despite his strength and skills, he was quiet and preferred to keep to himself. He rarely visited the town center, and when he did, he walked with a calm confidence, exchanging polite nods but never lingering for small talk. Some people admired him, others found him odd, and a few were simply wary. Children, in particular, were curious about him, whispering stories about the strange man who lived alone with his animals. The rancher's reputation grew over the years because of his independence. He never relied on anyone for help, and he never followed the town's usual customs. While most people attended local events, went to church regularly, or joined community gatherings, the rancher stayed on his land, working from sunrise to sunset. He repaired fences, tended to his animals, and spent hours studying the patterns of nature around him. People often wondered about his past. Some claimed he had come from a wealthy family but chose a simple life. Others said he had experienced a tragedy that made him withdraw from society. The truth, however, was known only to him, and that made him even more intriguing to the residents of Willow Creek. Life in Willow Creek was peaceful, but it had its own quiet rhythm of events. Every Friday, the town held a small market where farmers sold vegetables, fruits, and handmade goods. Children ran around, playing tag while their parents chatted and bought fresh produce. The market was a place of community, laughter, and shared stories. Yet the rancher rarely attended. On the rare occasions he came, people would notice him buying only what he needed and leaving immediately, almost as if he wished to avoid attention. It was during one of these ordinary days that the first hint of change appeared. The town council had announced a new plan to build a small recreational park on the edge of town, near the rancher's land. The idea was to provide children with a safe place to play and give families a spot to relax during weekends. Most residents were excited about it. They discussed plans for swings, slides, picnic areas, and even a small pond for ducks. The announcement was met with applause at the town meeting, and everyone seemed to agree that the park would bring joy and improve the community's life. But not everyone felt the same way. The rancher had his own opinion about the plan, though he did not share it openly at first. From his porch, he could see the area where the park would be built. To him, it was more than just an empty space. It was part of the natural landscape he had cared for over the years. He had watched the wildflowers bloom there, observed the birds nesting in the trees, and noticed the paths deer and rabbits took during the night. To him, the construction of the park felt like an intrusion, a disturbance to the peaceful balance of nature that he had grown to respect deeply. Word of the rancher's quiet disapproval spread slowly through the town. People noticed him inspecting the land more frequently, walking along the boundaries, and sometimes speaking quietly to himself as he examined the soil and plants. Neighbors began to wonder what he was planning. Some tried to approach him, asking politely about his thoughts on the park, but he would only nod and say little. This only fueled curiosity and rumors. Soon whispers filled the air. "The rancher doesn't like the park. I heard he might do something about it. Why does he always look so serious when he walks near that field?" Despite the growing speculation, the rancher remained calm. He understood that his feelings about the land were his own, and he did not yet feel the need to act. He spent his days tending to his cattle, repairing fences, and observing nature. Yet, deep down, a sense of unease grew. He knew that if the construction began, it would change the land forever. The thought bothered him, but he was patient and careful, preferring to watch and wait before taking any action. Life went on in Willow Creek, and the town continued its routines. Children played, markets thrived, and families enjoyed their weekends. But every now and then, people would notice the rancher standing at the edge of his property, looking out at the field that was soon to become a park. His presence became a silent statement, a reminder that he cared deeply about his land and would not let changes happen without thought. People began to pay attention, wondering what would happen next. Would the rancher speak up? Would he act? Or would he remain quiet, letting the town follow its plans? Meanwhile, the rancher's personal life remained a mystery. He had no close family in the town, and friends were few. Some townspeople assumed he was lonely, but anyone who took the time to observe him would see a man who was content with his own company. He found joy in small things: a calf taking its first steps, a bird building a nest, the way sunlight fell across the rolling hills. These moments, quiet and simple, were enough to keep him grounded. Yet, the thought of losing a piece of the land he cherished brought a tension he could not ignore. Even as the story of the park began to dominate conversations in the town, the rancher's presence remained calm but undeniable. People watched him more closely, speculating about his intentions. Some were worried, others were intrigued, but everyone agreed that something unusual was happening. For the first time, the peaceful rhythm of Willow Creek was interrupted, not by loud arguments or conflicts, but by the quiet, steady attention of a man who cared deeply about what mattered to him. And so, the stage was set. The town continued its everyday life, but a quiet tension lingered in the air. The rancher, standing tall and unwavering, became the center of curiosity and speculation. Everyone wondered, what would he do? Would he accept the changes quietly, or would he take action that no one expected? Only time would tell, and the townspeople soon realized that life in Willow Creek was about to change in ways they had never imagined. The town of Willow Creek was buzzing more than usual now. Ever since the council announced the plan for a recreational park, conversations had changed. Families who once exchanged smiles at the market now whispered, "Have you heard what the rancher is planning?" Shopkeepers overheard neighbors arguing in front of their stores, debating whether the rancher would act to stop the park or stay silent. The town had been peaceful for so long that even the smallest hint of tension felt like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. The rancher, for his part, remained mostly quiet, but inside, his mind was a whirlwind. He had grown attached to the land, more than anyone else in the town realized. Every tree, every wildflower, every winding path was a part of his daily life. The thought of someone digging into that earth, leveling the hills, and changing the landscape filled him with unease. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more a deep sense of responsibility. He felt that he alone understood the land, the way it breathed, and the life it nurtured. He began to observe the area near the proposed park more carefully. Every morning before sunrise, he walked along the borders of his property, noticing the patterns of the animals, the way the grass bent in the wind, and the small nests tucked into trees. Sometimes he would crouch and study the soil, feeling its texture and imagining how it might change if the land were altered. To an outsider, it might have looked like an obsession, but to the rancher, it was preparation. He wanted to understand every detail before making any decision. As days passed, the town's curiosity grew. People started visiting the edges of his property, pretending to enjoy the scenery while secretly trying to spot any sign of his reaction. Mothers with children lingered in the fields, pointing out to their kids, "See, that's the rancher who might do something about the park." Gossip spread in whispers and hushed tones. Some residents worried that he might actually interfere, while others speculated that he would quietly accept the plan. The rancher, aware of all the attention, remained calm outwardly but thoughtful inwardly. He had faced challenges before, mostly alone, and he knew how to stay steady when others watched. But this situation was different. Unlike fixing a fence or moving cattle, this was about defending something that no one else fully understood: his connection to the land. He considered talking to the town council, explaining his concerns, but quickly dismissed the idea. Words could not capture what he felt, and he feared that the council would dismiss his worries as unimportant. Meanwhile, rumors in town took on a life of their own. At the market, people speculated wildly. "I heard the rancher might block the construction," one person whispered. "No, he would never do that," another said. "I think he's planning something big, something no one expects." Even the children joined in, daring each other to peek at his property from a distance, imagining heroic or mischievous acts that the rancher might take. These stories grew in the telling, each retelling making the rancher appear more dramatic, more mysterious, and more powerful than he actually was. Despite the town's growing excitement and anxiety, the rancher spent his days methodically preparing. He inspected every part of the land, noting weak points in fences and areas where wildlife gathered. He repaired old gates, mended broken boards, and cleared paths where no one usually walked. To him, these actions were not about confrontation, they were about readiness. He was careful not to alarm anyone directly. There were no loud speeches, no threatening gestures, no calls for attention. Instead, every movement was quiet, deliberate, and purposeful. As the council prepared for the first construction meetings, a few brave townspeople approached the rancher directly. They wanted to know his opinion, hoping to either convince him to accept the plan or persuade him to stay neutral. The rancher listened politely but did not give clear answers. "I'll see what needs to be done," he said simply, leaving them unsure whether he supported or opposed the park. Some people left frustrated, feeling that his silence was disrespectful. Others were intrigued, sensing that something important was quietly unfolding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the fields with golden light, the rancher stood at the edge of his property. The gentle rustling of the grass and the soft calls of distant animals filled the air. He felt a mixture of calm and determination. This land had been his companion through countless years, and he could not imagine it being changed carelessly. He knew that his next steps would be watched, analyzed, and judged. But for the first time, he felt a clear resolve. He had to act, even if no one else understood why. In town, tension continued to mount. Parents began to take sides, some supporting the rancher and his quiet defiance, others backing the council's vision for the park. Local newspapers published letters to the editor debating the pros and cons of the project, mentioning the rancher's rumored position. Children spoke in hushed voices about what they imagined would happen if the rancher did something dramatic. The town had never experienced this level of excitement before, and it was slowly starting to change the way people thought about their community. At night, when the streets were quiet and the town seemed to settle into its usual routine, the rancher remained awake. He walked along the fences, checking every detail again. He considered every possible outcome, imagining what would happen if he acted or if he stayed passive. Every decision carried weight. He understood that no matter what he did, the town would react strongly. People might admire him, scold him, or even fear him. But in the end, he knew that he could not ignore his instincts. He had a duty to the land, and that duty mattered more than gossip or popularity. Meanwhile, a few of the town's older residents remembered stories from years ago about other people who had stood firm for what they believed in. They told younger neighbors, "Sometimes, one person can make a difference." These words gave the town a sense of anticipation. Everyone began watching the rancher more closely, wondering if he would be that person who stood up, who made the bold move that no one expected. Conversations shifted from casual chatter to speculation and theory, as the rancher became the silent protagonist of a story the town was writing collectively. By now, the rancher's presence had become a symbol. To some, he represented wisdom, patience, and a deep respect for nature. To others, he was a potential obstacle, a mysterious figure whose actions could disrupt plans everyone else thought were good. But to him, these labels did not matter. What mattered was the land itself, the living ecosystem that thrived quietly without needing anyone's approval. He felt a profound responsibility, not to the town, not to the council, but to the land itself. Every day, he continued his careful preparations. He marked areas where construction might cause damage, strengthened fences near water sources, and ensured that wildlife had safe passages. The rancher moved with quiet precision, aware that any loud action could draw unnecessary attention. He spoke occasionally to a neighboring farmer who understood his concerns, but he trusted very few people. Most of the town could only guess what he was planning, creating an air of suspense and uncertainty that kept everyone on edge. As the days turned into weeks, the tension reached a subtle but powerful peak. The town waited, and the rancher watched. The council scheduled meetings, surveys were conducted, and plans for the park were slowly coming together. But one thing was clear: the rancher was not ignoring the situation. He was silently preparing for something, and the whole town could feel it, even if they could not see it yet. The quiet calm of Willow Creek was slowly giving way to anticipation. People whispered, argued, and speculated. Children imagined wild scenarios, adults debated ethics and responsibility, and newspapers published letters full of hope, worry, and advice. Yet through it all, the rancher remained steady. He moved with purpose, observed with care, and thought deeply. He was readying himself for a decision that could change the town forever. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter. The rancher's quiet preparation had created tension, curiosity, and even a little fear. The town had begun to realize that this was not just about a park. It was about a man who cared deeply for something most people would overlook. Everyone wondered what he would do, and the answer was still unknown. But one thing was certain: the rancher was determined, and when he acted, it would be a moment no one in Willow Creek would forget. The town of Willow Creek had been waiting, speculating, and whispering for weeks. Everyone could feel that something significant was about to happen. The rancher had become the quiet center of the town's attention, and the tension that had been simmering finally reached a boiling point. People walked a little faster through the streets, looking toward the outskirts where the rancher's land met the field chosen for the new park. Children played with hushed excitement, daring each other to peek at the rancher's property. Adults argued quietly, some worried about what might happen, others secretly curious to see the outcome. The rancher, meanwhile, was calm. Inside his home, he moved with purpose. He had thought carefully about every possible consequence and had made a decision. He knew that once he acted, there would be no turning back. His heart was steady, his mind clear. This was not about defiance for the sake of it. This was about protecting something he loved, something that was part of him, his land. Early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen, he stepped outside. The first light of dawn painted the sky with soft oranges and pinks, and the air was crisp and fresh. The rancher moved quietly across the field, checking fences, gates, and pathways. He paused for a moment, listening to the birds singing and the wind rustling the grass. To him, it was a sacred moment, a calm before the storm. He knew that soon the town would see him act and the reaction would be immediate. Word had already spread that the rancher might take some kind of action. People began gathering near the edges of his property, keeping a safe distance but eager to witness the event. Families brought their children, and even a few curious teenagers sneaked closer than they should have. The townspeople whispered among themselves. "He's going to do it today," one said. "I can feel it," another replied. The excitement and anxiety were tangible. No one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone knew that it would be unforgettable. The rancher started with careful, deliberate movements. He positioned wooden stakes in certain areas, reinforcing the boundaries of his land. He repaired gates and made sure that any paths leading into the property were clearly marked. He worked methodically, his hands skilled from years of labor, and his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. Every action was precise, every decision intentional. He was not reckless. He was determined and careful, understanding fully the impact of his actions on both the land and the people watching. As the morning progressed, more townspeople gathered. They watched silently, some in awe, some with suspicion. Even the local council members had come, hoping to see what the rancher might do. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and concern. No one wanted to provoke him, but they also could not ignore what was happening. The rancher, aware of the growing crowd, did not falter. He continued his work, moving with quiet confidence, entirely in control of the situation. Suddenly, a sound broke the morning silence. It was subtle at first, a creaking, shifting noise, but it grew louder as the rancher acted. He had started building a temporary barrier along the edge of the field designated for the park. The barrier was simple but effective: wooden posts, rope, and strategically placed planks that marked his claim. It was not dangerous, but it was unmistakably clear. He was making a statement. The townspeople gasped, some whispered in disbelief, and others stepped back instinctively. The rancher had acted. People began talking louder now, debating what they were seeing. "He's actually doing it," one woman exclaimed. "I can't believe he has the courage," another said. Children pointed excitedly, and teenagers filmed the scene with their phones, sharing it with friends. The rancher, however, remained focused. He did not seek approval or attention. His actions were not for the crowd, they were for the land he loved. Some of the town's older residents remembered stories from the past of people who had stood firm for what they believed in. They whispered to each other, "This is how change happens." Sometimes one person must act. These words gave a sense of validation to the situation, even though the younger townspeople were more focused on the drama of the moment. The rancher's determination became a lesson in courage, whether the townspeople realized it or not. The local council quickly realized that the situation had escalated beyond simple planning. They attempted to speak to the rancher, hoping to calm tensions and negotiate. "Please, we don't want conflict," one council member called out. The rancher looked up briefly but said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. He was not angry, nor was he seeking confrontation. He simply wanted to protect what mattered to him. His eyes met theirs, calm and unwavering, and the message was clear: he would not be moved. Meanwhile, the town's gossip spread even faster. By mid-morning, neighbors who had not come to watch the scene firsthand were already speculating. "He's brave," some said. "He's stubborn," others said. The newspapers later described it as a moment that shocked the town and challenged expectations. People from nearby areas came to witness the unusual sight of a single rancher taking a quiet stand against a widely supported town plan. The incident became a story of courage, independence, and the delicate balance between individual rights and community plans. By late morning, the rancher had completed his work. The barrier was in place, clear and noticeable, but not harmful. It marked a boundary, a simple line that said, "This land is important and I will protect it." The townspeople, although divided in opinion, could not help but respect the clarity of his actions. Some shook their heads, disappointed or frustrated. Others nodded quietly, acknowledging the dedication it took to act with such thoughtfulness and purpose. As the day went on, the rancher remained near his property, watching calmly. Children continued to play at a distance, adults whispered, and the council debated next steps. He did not leave, did not argue, and did not seek applause. He simply observed, knowing that his actions had made an impact. The land was still peaceful, the animals unharmed, and the barrier stood as a testament to careful, intentional decision-making. Even those who disagreed with him could not deny that he had courage. The rancher had acted in a way that was neither reckless nor destructive, but bold enough to make the entire town pay attention. He had taken responsibility, shown conviction, and made it clear that he valued the land above approval or popularity. For many, this was a lesson they would not forget, about patience, about respect for nature, and about standing firm when something mattered deeply. By evening, the crowd had dispersed, though conversations continued long into the night. Families discussed the event around dinner tables, neighbors debated the implications on their porches, and children told exaggerated stories about the day the rancher acted. The barrier remained, a quiet symbol of his determination. The rancher, after a day of focused work and silent resolve, finally stepped inside his home. He looked out over the land one last time before dusk, feeling calm and satisfied. He had acted, and he had done so in a way that stayed true to his principles. For the first time in weeks, the town felt a shift. Life in Willow Creek would never be the same. People had seen someone act decisively, thoughtfully, and with courage. Whether they agreed with the rancher or not, they had witnessed an event that would become part of the town's history. It was a moment that reminded everyone that sometimes, a single person's actions could challenge assumptions, spark conversation, and leave a lasting impression. And so, the rancher's act of quiet defiance became a defining moment for Willow Creek. It was not dramatic in a violent sense, nor was it intended to hurt anyone. Instead, it was a measured, intentional action that reflected deep care, thoughtful preparation, and unwavering courage. The town would talk about it for months, and even years later, parents would recount the story to their children. The event marked the beginning of a new chapter in Willow Creek, one where people began to understand the value of standing firm for what truly mattered, even when it was not easy or popular. The morning after the rancher's quiet but decisive action, Willow Creek woke up to a different feeling. The streets were alive with whispers and speculation. Families walked more slowly to the market, pausing to exchange hurried words about what had happened. The children were unusually excited, their laughter carrying stories of exaggerated heroics about the rancher's bold move. Adults spoke in hushed tones, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others nodded silently, clearly impressed. The rancher's barrier had created a ripple that spread through the entire town, and everyone wanted to be part of the story. At the local grocery store, neighbors crowded together discussing every detail they had witnessed. "Did you see how calm he was?" one woman said. "I thought he might get angry, but he didn't even yell," another replied. "I heard he planned everything carefully for weeks," a shopkeeper added. Conversations buzzed with speculation. Why did he act? What would happen next? And how far would he go to protect his land? Even those who had never been near the rancher's property felt drawn into the story. The entire town was caught in the energy of a scandal that was remarkable not for chaos, but for the courage and determination behind it. The council members who had arrived at the scene to try to negotiate felt the weight of the situation. They had assumed the rancher might be persuaded or intimidated, but they were wrong. He had acted quietly, with no need for approval, and the barrier was now an undeniable fact. The council convened immediately, discussing what steps to take. Some members argued that they should respect the rancher's decision, recognizing the care and thought behind it. Others worried about the project, concerned that delays or conflict would frustrate families eager for the new park. Tension filled the council chamber, echoing the divided opinions of the townspeople. Meanwhile, the local newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, "Rancher Takes Stand, Town Divided Over Unexpected Action." Reporters interviewed neighbors, children, and even visitors who had come to see the rancher's work. Quotes filled the pages, some praising his courage and foresight, others criticizing him for creating unnecessary tension. The story quickly spread beyond Willow Creek, and by the end of the day, people from nearby towns were curious to hear the details. The rancher had become more than a local figure. He was now a symbol of determination, independence, and controversy. Despite the growing attention, the rancher remained composed. He did not seek interviews or explanations. He continued his daily routine, tending to his cattle, inspecting the land, and quietly observing the town's reactions. To him, the barrier was not a statement of defiance, but a necessary action to protect something he valued deeply. He understood that people would react emotionally, but he trusted that time and calm reasoning would reveal the importance of his decision. He moved with patience, aware that true impact often unfolded slowly. The townspeople's reactions were varied and vivid. Some families supported him openly, leaving notes of encouragement and small gifts at the edge of his property. "Thank you for caring about our land," one note read simply. Others were frustrated and anxious, worried that his actions might stall the park's construction indefinitely. At the local diner, heated discussions broke out over coffee and sandwiches. Parents debated the ethics of his decision. Teenagers giggled about the dramatic scenes they had witnessed, and children retold the story with imaginative twists, turning the rancher into a hero or a mysterious figure capable of extraordinary feats. In schools, teachers noticed a shift in the conversations among students. Children eagerly shared their perspectives, some admiring the rancher's bravery, others questioning whether he had done the right thing. Teachers used the moment to encourage discussion about responsibility, respect for nature, and standing firm in one's beliefs. The rancher's quiet action had become an educational moment, teaching lessons that went beyond the immediate situation. Students learned about planning, careful thought, and acting with intention, even when faced with widespread skepticism or opposition. As days passed, the town began to experience the real effects of the rancher's decision. Surveyors and construction workers encountered the barrier and had to adjust their plans. Meetings with the council became more frequent, and debates over compromise intensified. Some residents organized petitions, attempting to either support the rancher's stance or push forward with the park. The rancher, as always, did not interfere with these efforts. He observed quietly, allowing the town to work through its own discussions and disagreements. Despite the tension, the rancher's approach remained calm and respectful. He did not confront anyone aggressively, nor did he escalate conflicts. Instead, he maintained a steady presence, demonstrating patience and thoughtful action. This approach slowly earned him a mixture of respect and wariness. People realized that he was not reacting out of stubbornness or pride, but from genuine care and thoughtful planning. Even those who disagreed with him began to acknowledge the strength it took to stand firmly for what mattered most. Meanwhile, the story continued to spread beyond Willow Creek. Visitors arrived to see the barrier and observe the rancher's land, curious about the man who had acted so decisively. Journalists interviewed townspeople, capturing the mix of admiration, frustration, and fascination that his actions had inspired. The rancher became a symbol, a reminder that one person could influence a community through careful, thoughtful action. While some criticized him for disrupting plans, many others praised his courage, determination, and respect for the land. The council attempted to negotiate compromise, suggesting alternative locations for the park or smaller adjustments to the original plan. The rancher listened patiently, considering each proposal, but he did not rush to agree. He explained that the land had its own needs, and that changes could not be made without careful thought. His calm reasoning gradually helped some town members understand his perspective, even if they did not fully agree. Slowly, the initial outrage began to soften, replaced by cautious dialogue and negotiation. Yet, the scandal did not disappear entirely. Some residents remained angry, feeling that the rancher had disrupted a plan meant for the community. Arguments flared at markets, in homes, and even in the local diner. People debated endlessly about fairness, priorities, and the balance between individual rights and community needs. But these arguments, as heated as they were, carried an undercurrent of fascination. Everyone recognized that the rancher had taken a stand unlike any they had seen before. The event became a story to be told, remembered, and discussed for years to come. As weeks went by, a kind of balance slowly returned to Willow Creek. The council, the townspeople, and the rancher found ways to coexist peacefully. Construction plans were adjusted, compromises were made, and both sides began to understand each other's perspectives. The rancher continued his daily routines, his presence now accepted as part of the town's story. People visited his land not to provoke him, but to admire his dedication, and some even left messages of respect for his thoughtful action. Through the turmoil, the rancher never wavered in his principles. He continued to care for his land, observe nature, and act with intention. The barrier he had built remained a symbol, not of conflict, but of careful planning, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what mattered deeply. Over time, the story of the rancher's decisive action became part of the town's identity. It was shared at community gatherings, in classrooms, and around dinner tables, reminding everyone of the power of thoughtful, courageous action. By the end of the month, Willow Creek had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. People were more aware of their surroundings, more considerate of different perspectives, and more willing to discuss important issues calmly. The rancher's stand had sparked a new level of awareness and dialogue in the community. Families reflected on the importance of listening, observing, and acting responsibly. Children grew up hearing the story and learning lessons about integrity, responsibility, and the value of standing firm in one's beliefs. Even as time passed, the events of those weeks continued to influence Willow Creek. The rancher remained a quiet figure on the outskirts of town, tending to his land, watching the seasons change, and maintaining the barrier he had built. Visitors came and went, stories were retold with embellishments, and the town carried forward the memory of a moment when one person's courage, preparation, and careful action left a lasting impression on an entire community. The scandal, though intense at the time, ultimately became a story of respect, reflection, and understanding. The town realized that true change often requires patience, observation, and thoughtful decision-making. The rancher had acted not out of anger or pride, but out of care and responsibility. His actions created dialogue, reflection, and a deeper connection between the land and the community. The events that unfolded served as a reminder that even in the smallest towns, one person's commitment and courage can leave a mark that lasts far longer than anyone could have imagined. Months had passed since the rancher had built his quiet barrier on the edge of his land. The initial tension in Willow Creek had slowly begun to settle, replaced by a mixture of respect, curiosity, and reflection. The park project had been adjusted to accommodate the ranchers' concerns, and construction had continued in areas that did not disturb the land he had worked so hard to protect. Though the event had caused a stir, it had also brought the town together in unexpected ways. People had started to think differently about the land, the community, and the balance between individual responsibility and collective plans. The rancher, as always, continued his routines, quietly tending to his animals, inspecting fences, and observing nature. He moved with calm precision, not for recognition, but out of a sense of duty to his land. Each morning, he would walk through his fields, listening to the sounds of wildlife, feeling the texture of the soil, and noting the way sunlight illuminated the hills. He found comfort in the quiet, understanding that life was made up of small moments like these. The barrier he had built remained, a simple but powerful reminder of the day he chose to act and the meaning behind it. The townspeople, too, had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Families who had once hurried through their days began to take time to notice the beauty around them. Children now paused to watch birds build nests, and neighbors discussed ways to preserve the natural spaces that made Willow Creek special. Teachers incorporated the story of the rancher into lessons about responsibility, observation, and courage. Sometimes one person's actions can teach an entire community, they would say. The rancher had become a living example, showing that standing firm for what mattered, when done thoughtfully and respectfully, could inspire others. Visitors continued to come, curious to see the land and the man who had acted decisively. They were often surprised to find a rancher who was quiet, polite, and humble. He did not seek attention, and he rarely spoke to strangers, but he allowed them to observe, learn, and appreciate the work he had done. Many left inspired by his calm determination, understanding that his actions were guided by care rather than confrontation. Some even wrote letters of appreciation, expressing how much they admired the way he had acted thoughtfully to protect something he loved. In the town itself, conversations about the incident became less about disagreement and more about understanding. People shared stories of the rancher's daily routines, his dedication to the land, and his ability to act with patience and thoughtfulness. Even those who had initially opposed his actions began to acknowledge the wisdom in what he had done. The barrier, once a symbol of conflict, had become a symbol of careful decision-making, courage, and respect. People began to see that his action had not been about defiance, but about protecting something valuable in a world that often overlooked the quiet and meaningful things. As the seasons changed, the rancher's legacy continued to grow. In spring, wildflowers bloomed along the edges of his property, untouched and thriving, a living testament to his care. Summer brought warm days and the cheerful sounds of children playing in the park areas that had been carefully preserved. Autumn painted the hills with gold and red, and the rancher would walk along the fence lines, feeling a sense of pride and satisfaction. Even in winter, when snow blanketed the land, the rancher's routines continued. He maintained his fences, fed his animals, and kept a watchful eye on the land he had worked so hard to protect. Through every season, his actions reminded the town of the value of patience, preparation, and dedication. The council, too, had learned from the experience. They recognized that decisions affecting the community required thoughtful consideration, listening to all perspectives, and respecting the land. Future projects were approached with care, ensuring that environmental and personal concerns were taken into account. The story of the rancher became a touchstone for guidance, illustrating how one person's courage and careful planning could shape the future of a community. Meetings, debates, and planning sessions often referenced his actions, reminding everyone of the importance of listening, observing, and acting responsibly. Over time, Children who had witnessed the rancher's decisive act grew up telling the story to the next generation. They spoke of a man who acted thoughtfully, with care and courage, and who reminded the town that standing firm in one's beliefs could inspire others. Teachers continued to use the story in classrooms, emphasizing lessons of patience, observation, and responsibility. The rancher's quiet action had created a legacy far beyond the land itself. It had influenced the hearts and minds of the entire community. Even as years passed, the rancher remained a steady presence in Willow Creek. Neighbors occasionally stopped by to chat, visitors came to observe the land, and children continued to watch with curiosity and admiration. The barrier he had built was still there, now weathered slightly by time, but strong and meaningful. It was no longer seen as an obstacle or a source of tension. Instead, it was a symbol of thoughtful courage, careful planning, and respect for the natural world. People often pointed to it as an example of how small, deliberate actions could create lasting impact. The rancher himself remained humble, never seeking recognition or praise. He continued to focus on his work, his animals, and the land he loved. He understood that the real reward was not in attention or approval, but in the knowledge that he had acted with care and integrity. Every sunrise reminded him of the importance of patience. Every breeze through the trees reflected the quiet persistence of life, and every animal he cared for was a living reminder of the value of responsibility. Through his actions, he had taught the town lessons that went far beyond the simple act of building a barrier, lessons about respect, courage, and the impact of deliberate choice. In the evenings, when the town grew quiet and the streets were filled with the soft glow of lamplight, the rancher would often stand at the edge of his property and watch the stars. He reflected on the past months, the reactions of the town, and the ways in which his simple actions had created a ripple effect. He thought about the families, the children, the council, and even the visitors who had come to learn from his example. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because of recognition, but because he had stayed true to his principles. He had acted with care, thoughtfulness, and integrity, and in doing so, he had created a story worth remembering. By the time the park was completed, with its swings, slides, and picnic areas carefully placed away from the rancher's preserved land, Willow Creek had fully adapted to the change. The community had learned to balance its needs with respect for individual rights and the natural environment. Families enjoyed the park, children played freely, and the rancher continued his quiet routines nearby. The story of his actions remained a constant topic of conversation, a reminder of courage, patience, and the importance of standing firm for what truly matters. The rancher's influence extended beyond his property. His quiet example inspired other residents to act thoughtfully in their own lives. Gardeners tended their plants with more care, neighbors offered help with renewed understanding, and community members approached decisions with patience and consideration. Willow Creek had become more aware of its environment, more thoughtful in its actions, and more respectful of one another. The rancher's act had created not just a physical change, but a cultural one, a lasting legacy that shaped the values and perspectives of the entire town. Even long after the events had passed, the rancher remained a symbol. Children who had grown up hearing the story remembered it as a lesson in courage and careful planning. Adults reflected on the importance of patience and observation. The community carried forward the understanding that meaningful actions, taken thoughtfully and responsibly, could inspire change, build respect, and create a legacy that lasted far longer than the moment itself. The rancher, content in his quiet routines, continued to live with integrity, patience, and care. He had faced a challenge, acted decisively, and shaped the community in a way that no one had anticipated. Willow Creek would never forget the day the rancher built his barrier, nor the lessons learned from his actions. In the end, the story was not about scandal or conflict. It was about respect, courage, responsibility, and the enduring power of thoughtful action.